I asked, you delivered, and now it's time to react to your assorted hot takes about Final Fantasy XIV. So let's waste no more time. Hello, everybody. It's your boy Jmulls in Final Fantasy XVII. First up on the docket tonight, we have at Demon Ghibli 89, who says Final Fantasy XVII should be the next MMO. And I see where this is coming from. I don't think I agree, but I can understand where it's coming from. It gets to a point where it becomes extremely tiring, where a lot of requested features or changes to the game kind of just get brushed aside, or just said, well, probably not going to happen anytime soon because the back end of this game is propped up by hope and bubblegum. I get that. But they do seem pretty adamant about Final Fantasy XIV itself going on for another 10 years. Though they did kind of claim that like a year or two ago, so who knows, maybe it's more like 8 or 9 now. But regardless, viewing it all through that lens, I don't think all of the problems that Final Fantasy XIV is currently facing would necessarily be remedied by just making a new game. Some of the problems are more like idea focused rather than just based on raw execution. Not all of them, don't get me wrong here, but I will say personally as a fan, I would rather Final Fantasy XVII just be an actual single-player RPG. That's what I would be far more excited for. Naturally, I would be excited for another MMO as well, right? Like, don't get me wrong here. But if you asked me in my heart of hearts what I would want most out of Final Fantasy XVII, it would be a turn-based Final Fantasy game again. That's what I really want to see. Mainly because, one, I love turn-based Final Fantasy overall, but still, there's a part of my brain that is so morbidly curious to see how Square Enix would tackle a mainline Final Fantasy scale game as a turn-based game. And I just want to know how that would actually perform, not only with the audience of people that would actually play it, right? But also in terms of how would Square Enix make that game? What would it look like? How would it be executed? That's what I'm so really curious to actually see. Do I think it has to be that? No. But if we're asking what I would personally want out of Final Fantasy XVII, a turn-based Final Fantasy game, that's honestly somewhat akin to Expedition 33, because that game was basically just, what if we took a bunch of JRPG mechanics and had it all strapped to the vehicle like a PS1 era Final Fantasy game? I would love that feel out of Square Enix again for Final Fantasy. I'm not particularly craving a whole new MMO out of them because I don't think every issue that Final Fantasy XIV is currently having is necessarily fixed or remedied by just doing a new MMO. Some of them, sure, especially ones that are more focused on the back end, but I think a well-executed Final Fantasy XIV would be more than enough for me. But yeah, honestly, I would just kind of rather a single-player RPG. It already takes so long between releases for mainline Final Fantasy games. I don't particularly want that gap to be even wider. And I mean numbered mainline games, not talking about like the Final Fantasy VII Remake games. I talked about this before though. It's like, I think one of the main things Final Fantasy needs to do going forward is just find some kind of gameplay identity. I won't yap your ears off about this because I've gone off on this topic many times before, but yeah, I just don't really feel like we need another MMO right now, especially since I'm very interested in this current story arc. I want to see where it goes. Next up, we have at Glitch Master Studios, who says, I want Dark Knight to remember that we are supposed to get hurt to make our magic better. Give us a trait that encourages us to stand in AoEs. Let us be a little bit scary again. Now, I don't know about you, but when I play tank, yeah, whenever I see an AoE, that's not a tank mechanic. That's a healer mechanic. Yeah, I have the Blackest Night. That thing needs to get popped ASAP. I'm going to stand in every AoE. I'm going to tank every hit I possibly can to make sure that thing gets popped. Not even because it might be a DPS increase. Who cares about that? I want to see the sparkly effect on my hotbar. That's what I'm looking for. If I don't see the sparkle, it's a trash button I'm not pressing. Look, in all seriousness though, I understand the balance issues that the Blackest Night has, and I do think my enjoyment of the button has been decreased since every tank basically just has a better version of it now. But I always did get a bit of a thrill out of like properly utilizing that button. It always did feel good when I actually got it to work. But I will say, I think if Dark Knight leans even more in that direction, I can only imagine the nightmare that it would be to actually balance that thing correctly. And look, I'm gonna be frank with you. I don't know if random tanks that I get whenever I feel like playing as a DPS job really need to be incentivized to stand in even more AoEs. I don't know if I need that in my life. I mean, it's a possibility. I'm just, let's say, concerned. I think concerned is the right word here. Next up, we have at Downy Dabs, who says the story was more compelling when it was about Eorzea. There's just something about early game RPGs, and especially MMORPGs, that just gets lost the more time goes on. It's like the Dragon Ball effect, right? Where in order to keep people engaged going into the next boss, you have to up the stakes compared to the last one, and you have to do that again, and then again, and then again, and then we're fighting God, and then we're fighting a different God, or fighting 5 gods, or we're fighting the God of gods, who knows? And you just continually move away from those early day roots of being a new adventure in a weird magical land, going on a whole bunch of quests, maybe taking on a cult, maybe like learning about like this little group of civilizations over here, that feeling of diving into a dangerous spooky dungeon that may contain things like goblins. Oh no! There's like something to that feeling that just gets continually lost, especially as these long-term stories continue to go on. And it's like, I play both Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, and like both of these games suffer from this issue, exactly. And it's like, with Final Fantasy XIV, we're the warrior of light, right? Like, there's not really much the game can throw at us that will actually feel like an actual threat. And more often than not, it feels like they have to write the story in such a way to where we're incapacitated, or we just can't like engage in a situation at full capabilities for whatever reason, because we just have this implicit assumption that no matter what the game throws at us story-wise, we should just be able to sort out relatively quickly, mainly with just like one boss fight, right? And I think with World of Warcraft, you can best experience this by going from retail WoW, just going back to like Classica TBC. It's very noticeable. The pace is completely different. The tone is completely different. And I think there's like an air of magic that gets lost or just becomes far too normalized. And it makes the game world just, I don't want to say feel lesser, just different, and not always in the best of ways. And genuinely, I don't know how you remedy this issue, because either you go for so long with the same low stakes to eventually it probably just ends up feeling too repetitious no matter what, or it just takes the same journey from the start to the middle to the end, just over a longer course of time. There's just no real good answer to this, in my opinion. It's just you have to execute on each of these different facets well. Next up, we have at Uko980, who says, just look at any MMO that has launched in the last 10 years after Final Fantasy XIV launched. They are all dead or dying. MMOs are too niche and need too much content for a new one to succeed in this market. They should just keep updating the engine of Final Fantasy XIV instead of throwing everything in the bin to make a new game that probably will fail anyway. I mean, I feel like Destiny 2 is relatively successful. It's just that game was kind of undermined by a bunch of bad decisions Bungie kept making. I think for a lot of people, they gauge success just whether or not the game can reach the lofty heights of like what Final Fantasy XIV did during Shadowbringers and Endwalker, or what World of Warcraft did for the longest time, right? I think it really does depend on the scope and the scale of the game. However, I think when it comes to a lot of these other games, it largely just comes down to execution. And like, yeah, games like Final Fantasy XIV, games like World of Warcraft, and even argue games like Guild Wars 2 at this point, or Star Wars The Old Republic, they've had so many years to iterate on their gameplay formula and just add things to the overall experience that if you're a fresh game coming onto the scene, you don't have all those years of development to add things onto the pile. ESO as well, right? So you're coming onto a scene and asking a lot of people that already have so much investment, both time, mentally, and emotionally into these other games, to say, hey, why not only buy our game, but also pay us a monthly sub, more likely than not, and start all over from scratch. And a lot of people will just go, well, I already play insert World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, Star Wars The Old Republic, Elder Scrolls Online. Why would I do that? But I think there's something inherent to the MMO genre that is everlasting, that keeps drawing people back to it, and it's this sense of perpetual progression. Knowing that you can log in every day if you want. You can have a long gaming sesh or a shorter gaming sesh and feeling as if you're doing something, as if you're adding something to your account and to your experiences that you can build off of going forward into the future. And it's like your account is building and building, and you're part of this living, breathing world that is being developed from one year into the next. And then it's also part of the reason we have seen so many gacha games take off as well as they have, because one, they're really easy to get into because they're free to play. And well, yeah, the monetization method of like gacha games can be very scummy, right? Don't get me wrong. For a lot of people, you can play those games free to play, because I did for the longest time. maybe not the longest time, but for quite a long time there. And you can have a really enjoyable experience, and you can get that sense of perpetual progression where you're adding onto your account and it's being built up over time. You can play for a long time over a short period of time. And also you're taking part in this living, breathing world that is being developed and fleshed out, both mechanically but also story-wise, over the course of its lifespan. That is an inherent feeling that MMOs also are able to bring to the table, that a more confined one-off experience like a regular JRPG or a regular RPG or whatever just doesn't bring to the table, unless they're a very long-running series. But even then, some people like just having that thing to always return to and say, hey, this is building off what it's already done. This is going into the future. This is a story. These are characters that are going to be brought into the future. It's not just, oh, this game has a beginning, middle, and an end. Some people just like that continued journey. It's one of the reasons I love MMOs so much and have played them for most of my life. It's like I started with RuneScape, I moved to WoW, then to Final Fantasy XIV, and now I just play both WoW and Final Fantasy XIV. I've dabbled in other MMOs, they never really grabbed my interest for a couple of reasons. For the longest time, too many MMOs that came out just felt like they were trying to piggyback off what World of Warcraft was. And they always failed or just never lived up to the expectations they wanted to set out for themselves because, well, they tried to like position themselves as like the WoW killer or like, hey guys, you like World of Warcraft? Well, we're gonna do what they kind of already do. Well, why would I play that game if I want a World of Warcraft experience when World of Warcraft is right there? That's one of the reasons Final Fantasy XIV took off so much, because it offered a unique experience, but also WoW was dipping in quality drastically around that time in Shadowbringers and Endwalker. You can even argue Stormblood if you want to. And it's not like people don't play MMORPGs anymore. I think the best comparison that I've ever heard, maybe not comparison, but just overall way of thinking about the situation, is that when WoW was at its like quote unquote peak, let's say, for argument's sake, saying like end of Wrath of the Lich King, early Cataclysm, the gaming market was like this, and like WoW was like this. And you can argue WoW is still like this, especially if you look some of the numbers, because it's kind of crazy how popular WoW still is. But the gaming market's no longer like this, it's like this. And this is probably underselling it. So it's just relative to how big the market for gaming is nowadays, especially with things like mobile games now. WoW and other MMORPGs are just a smaller slice of the pie, but there's still a lot of people that play these games. It's just now there's even more people that don't play these games or get a similar experience that satisfies that kind of same craving, but in a far more accessible way, like gacha games, which are available on your phone and can be played free to play. Some MMOs can be like that as well, but not all of them. And I think when it comes to games like Final Fantasy XIV and games like World of Warcraft, we have seen these games become less popular over certain periods of their time, not in my opinion because of the overall market, but because the decisions that those companies made that eroded the quality of the game or just made things feel too repetitious. And when a really good product is presented to the player base, we have seen these games start to rally. It's like, look at the WoW numbers when Classic started to come out. That was a massive turning point because you're basically feeding the dog. Of course, the dog is going to wither away and start to not care if you don't feed it. But when you start to actually feed it, well, it's now filled with life because you're giving it the nutrition, the sustenance that it actually needs. And the issues plaguing multiple MMOs aren't necessarily based on the market, in my opinion. They somewhat can be, right? But at the end of the day, the most important thing for these games to do and to continue to do in the future is provide a good product that understands the needs of their market and the people that they are deliberately trying to target. I think Final Fantasy XIV is starting to get better in this regard as well, especially when it comes to story. And games like WoW are starting to get better as well, but they're still really hit or miss when it comes to story. I don't think MMOs are ever going to really die. It's just the market is fundamentally different because it's massive now. That doesn't mean MMOs are going to die because they're not taking up a massive share of that market anymore, but they do have to adapt to the times and still understand, hey, what do we actually change and what should we keep the same? It sounds like a simple question to ask, but a lot of these games can still mess it up. It's just what kind of happens. And now here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with your own hot take about Final Fantasy XIV. How do you feel about the future direction of the game? And I may react to your hot takes in a future video. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And honestly, you guys have some absolutely crazy theories about the story direction for this game. I reacted to a handful of them, and well, some of you guys might be on the money. Want to find out more? You should check out this video right here for more. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.